Captain Travis Halley was a name etched into stone at Arlington. Officially killed in action during a top-secret Arctic flight in 2020, he had vanished into thin air, both literally and administratively. His last known location was somewhere over the Beaufort Sea, flying a C-130 Hercules on what the Air Force called classified reconnaissance operation. The weather had been brutal. Radar contact was lost 47 minutes after takeoff. Search. Teams scoured the Arctic for weeks, battling winds and sub-zero temperatures. No debris, no signal, no ejection, nothing. Eventually, the dreaded conclusion came. Travis was dead. His wife, Emily, accepted the folded flag in her trembling hands. The brass offered her carefully measured condolences. The unit held a closed casket ceremony with an empty box. They called it honorable. She called it hell. Friends. Whispered prayers. Pilots flew missing man formations. And life, with painful finality, moved on. But Captain Travis Halley hadn't died, not exactly. Over 3,000 miles away from Arlington, hidden in the shadows of the Alaskan mountain ranges, a man with a thick beard and a deep limp walked into a dusty aircraft hangar every Friday morning. Locals didn't know his story. They called him Bear because of the way he growled more than he talked, and because he could single-handedly hoist an aircraft's engine mount with nothing but brute strength and quiet determination. Bear worked at a small, forgotten civilian airstrip near Seward, a place where the snow rarely melted and the planes were older than the hangar roof. He rented a one-room cabin nearby and paid in cash. He never used a credit card, never showed ID, didn't own a phone. He fixed planes with surgical precision, the kind of mechanical intuition only someone born in a cockpit could possess. He never drank with the others after hours, never smiled, never asked for raises, just worked, breathed, and disappeared each night into the cold. Nobody asked Bear questions. Nobody got answers. But every Friday at 3 p.m., he entered the oldest part of the hangar, the one with a retired, decommissioned C-130, stripped of its Air Force insignia, repainted in civilian gray. It hadn't flown in years. Most didn't even know why it was there. But Bear climbed inside it, checked its engines, cleaned its instruments, and ran diagnostics like it was pre-flight inspection day. No one knew why. Until one afternoon in March 5. Years to the week after Travis, Halley was declared dead. The emergency call came through the station's dusty radio system. Mayday, mayday. Medevac down. We've lost both pilots. Repeat, both pilots unconscious. We are grounded on unstable ice. Request immediate assistance. Coordinates inbound. Is anyone receiving? The transmission cut through the static like a blade. The control room technician jumped to his feet and twisted the dial. Say again, do you copy? A different voice responded, desperate, crackling. We copy. Aircraft is on shelf Echo 59er. 6 wounded on board. Fuel critical. We are grounded and exposed to weather. Requesting emergency pilot extraction. Repeat. We need a pilot. Now, the dispatcher looked around. The airfield was empty of certified flyers. Commercial traffic was grounded due to the storm front. All FA, licensed personnel were out of range. It was hopeless. Then a heavy hand landed on the dispatcher's shoulder. I'll fly, Bear said. The dispatcher blinked. What? I said I'll fly. Bear didn't wait for a reply. He walked to the back room, opened a dusty locker no one knew he owned, and pulled out a thick flight jacket creased with age. On its right sleeve, a faded 10th Airlift wing patch. Below it, a stitched nameplate read, Halley. The dispatcher followed him, stunned. Wait, your name's Halley? Bear turned, tossed him a worn leather wallet. Inside was a yellowed military ID. Cracked with age. Capt. Travis M. Hale, U.S. Air Force status. Active duty clearance. Top SEC RIT. Dispatcher froze. He'd seen that name before in a newspaper article. In an obituary. You're supposed to be dead, he whispered. Travis looked him dead in the eye. Not today. Before the dispatcher could call anyone, Hale had already climbed into the cockpit of the old C-130. It wasn't military anymore, but he knew her systems by heart. She'd been part of his training unit once, years ago. The layout hadn't changed. His fingers danced over the controls like muscle memory. Outside, confused ground crew started forming. The engines roared to life. Dust and snow whipped through the airfield. The dispatcher finally snapped out of his trance and radioed air traffic. Unscheduled takeoff. C-130 tail number 6XJ. Pilot is ... Captain Travis Hale. Say again, came the reply. Hale's deceased. No, the dispatcher said. Voice shaking. He's very much alive, and he just took off. The C-130 lifted into the sky with a deep, thunderous rumble. Travis leveled off at 11,000 feet, checking coordinates and wind speeds. The storm was thick, but navigable. His breathing steadied. In his ears, the radio chirped. A voice, stunned. Who's responding? Travis keyed the mic. This is Ghostbird 1. I'm en route. There was silence. Then someone said what the whole Air Force was about to learn. Ghostbird 1? That call sign's retired. Not anymore, Travis replied. And just like that, the pilot who was officially dead was flying again toward a disaster no one else could stop. The C-130 bucked slightly as Travis Hale broke through the storm front, the kind of turbulence most pilots feared, but he welcomed. The aircraft, lovingly dubbed Lucy back in his active duty days, responded like an old friend stretching. After a long sleep, every switch he flipped, every lever he adjusted, came back to him with perfect recall. The years of silence hadn't dulled his skill. If anything, isolation had sharpened it. Inside the cockpit, the radio squawked again, more frantic now. Echo 59er Medevac, please respond. We have no active military airframes available in your zone. Say your condition again. A third. Voice cracked in, younger, panicked. Both pilots unconscious. Ice shelf is fracturing under us. Wounded stable for now, but we're losing daylight fast. Is there anyone out there? Travis reached for the mic. This is Ghostbird 1. I am inbound to Echo 59er. Estimated time on site, 16 minutes. Prepare for hard load. Silence followed. On the other end, the young medic leaned forward, confused. Ghostbird 1? What unit are you with? Travis kept his voice steady. No unit, just coming home. Across various military communication channels, the phrase Ghostbird 1 was met with confusion. Analysts, flight officers, and former squad mates stiffened when the name hit their consoles. It was an old call sign, long retired. Hale's call sign. In a command room in Virginia. Colonel Nathan Briggs leaned back in his leather chair, white. As a sheet, his aide turned slowly toward him. Sir? Ghostbird 1 just activated on a civilian frequency. En route to a medevac site, Briggs said nothing. He didn't need to. He already knew who was in the cockpit. Back in the air, Travis cut through the clouds, scanning terrain with sharp eyes. The storm had punched heavy drifts across the ice fields, but he spotted the signal flares blinking like dying fireflies on the horizon. Through binoculars, he saw the medevac bird wings frozen in place, rear hatch wide open. Figures moved quickly on the ground, signaling him, but he also saw the cracks. Jagged fissures cutting through the ice like veins under pale skin. The shelf wouldn't last much longer. His knuckles tightened on the yoke. He'd have to land without a tower, without ground crew, and without fail. One mistake, and he'd crash not just himself, but 6 wounded soldiers and 2 medics who were barely keeping them alive. Approaching Echo 59er, Travis radioed. Clear the landing strip. Firing up emergency flaps. A medic on the ground waved frantically. Runways half buried in drift. I see it, Halle said, his voice calm. He adjusted his angle, pulled the nose higher, then flared hard just above the ice. The wheels hit like thunder hard, jarring but solid. Snow kicked up in all directions. The plane skidded 30 feet. Before settling into a perfect halt, just 20 yards from a yawning black crack in the shelf, the hatch opened before the engine stopped humming. Travis stood tall inside the bay, flight jacket zipped, helmet on. One of the medics, a wiry corporal named Jenkins, stared at him in disbelief. You're Ghostbird 1? Help me get them inside, Travis said, stepping out. He moved fast. The ice moaned beneath their boots, but they loaded. The wounded with practiced urgency. One had a leg tourniquet. Another was barely breathing through a cracked chest plate. No time to ask questions. No time for reunions. Within 2 minutes, the entire medevac team and 6 casualties were inside. Travis shut the rear ramp manually, climbed back to the cockpit, and hit the throttle. The C-130 surged forward. Just as the rear tires lifted from the ice, the shelf groaned, then cracked wide open where they'd been moments earlier. Inside the aircraft, no one said a word. Even the medic, who'd been praying under his breath, simply stared out the window. Gripping the seat rail. Travis didn't look back. 10 minutes later, high above the clouds, someone finally broke the silence. You're supposed to be dead, Jenkins said, standing behind the pilot's seat. I was, Travis replied, eyes forward. Jenkins swallowed. Where have you been? Alaska. Off-grid. Watching the world lie. Jenkins shook his head. Why now? Why come back? Travis took a breath, then pointed toward the back of the plane. Because someone needed to. At Elmendorf Air Force Base, stunned airmen watched the radar. The inbound C-130 wasn't registered in any system. But it was coming in fast, carrying critical personnel. The tower received the call. Elmendorf. This is Ghostbird 1 requesting emergency clearance. Medical evac priority. Say again, Ghostbird 1? Not repeating, Travis replied. I've got 6 wounded and 2 medics. Touching down in 3. The tower officer turned to his commander, whispering, Sir... Ghostbird 1 is real. The runway was cleared immediately. When Travis landed, a swarm of personnel surrounded. The C-130. EMTs rushed inside to retrieve the wounded. Cameras snapped. Officers froze. Then Halle stepped down from the cockpit. He walked with a slight limp, but carried himself with the unmistakable presence of command. His flight jacket still bore his old patches, sun-faded, but intact. An Air Force. Colonel stormed forward. Identify yourself. Captain Travis Halle, he said without hesitation. Serial number 752441796. You're dead. Travis looked around at the runway, the ambulance lights, the stunned soldiers. Apparently not. Within hours, the story broke nationwide. Ghost pilot rescues doomed medevac team. News channels replayed grainy footage of Halle walking. From the C-130, veterans' forums exploded with rumors. Some called him a deserter. Others called him a myth. But one phrase stuck. The ghost returned. And across 1,000 radio frequencies, the same question repeated. Who was Ghostbird 1? And why did he come back now? The runway lights blurred behind Travis Halle as the C-130 powered down. Mechanics surrounded the aircraft, stunned not by its sudden arrival, but by who had been flying it. Nobody moved as he stepped down from the hatch, helmet under his arm. boots crunching the frost-lined tarmac. No salute greeted him. No commanding officer dared speak. The uniform he wore was 5 years out of date, but his posture was unmistakable. He was a pilot. A damn good one. Inside the base's operations center, chaos reigned. Are we confirming this? One analyst muttered, scrolling through archived personnel files. It's him, said another. Captain Travis Matthew Hawley. Kia, Arctic Mission, 2020. Declared dead. A superior officer stormed in. How the hell does a dead man fly a military transport into one of the most secure runways in the country? The answer was unfolding outside. Travis stood motionless as emergency. Medical teams wheeled the wounded toward the base hospital. He nodded once to the medic from the stranded medevac team, Jenkins, who offered a shaky salute in return. Young Corporal's eyes were full of questions, but none he dared ask aloud. Before Travis could walk away, a group of MPs formed a barrier. The lead officer, tall and stern-faced, raised a hand. Sir, you are to come with us. Travis said nothing. He didn't resist. He knew this moment would come not as they led him to an interrogation room inside the base's intelligence wing. A small crowd formed near the hangar's edge. Some were mechanics, some were officers. Others were young airmen who had grown up hearing ghost stories about Hale's final flight. They stared not at a fugitive, but at a legend, made flesh-dot inside the stark gray room. Travis sat beneath buzzing fluorescent lights, his flight jacket draped over the back of his chair. Across from him sat Lieutenant Colonel Rourke, a sharp-eyed interrogator who had worked for Internal Affairs for over a decade. Her folders were thick. Her tone was calm, surgical. You understand we're treating this as a security breach. I'd expect nothing less, Travis replied. You were declared dead. I'm aware. She narrowed her eyes. So where the hell have you been for the last 5 years? Travis didn't blink. Alaska. Surviving. That's not a full answer. It's the truth. Rourke paused, then slowly opened a file. We recovered a fragment of your crash site. No bodies, no signal. The story was you went down trying to evade Russian airspace. That's the story they told, Travis said, voice low. She looked up. And what's your story? He leaned forward, voice steady. I received emergency comms from a civilian research convoy. A storm trapped them. They were freezing. Command told me to ignore it, complete the mission. I made a choice. You disobeyed direct orders. I saved lives. Rourke remained quiet for a moment. And then I crashed. Communications were dead. I survived the wreck. My co-pilot didn't. You could have come home. I tried. Then I found out I'd been declared dead within 6 days. No inquiry, no retrieval. Just gone. I knew why. Why? Because admitting I disobeyed orders, no matter the reason, would have embarrassed your superiors. I was easier to bury. The silence that followed was deafening. While Rourke processed Hale's statement, the outside world was unraveling. News outlets flooded the internet with images of the landing. Former military personnel confirmed the identity. A group of soldiers at a Montana bar raised their glasses in a toast. Ghostbird 1 came back. On veteran forums, stories resurfaced, whispers of Hale's skills, his loyalty, and the strange circumstances around his disappearance. Photos of his flight crew circulated. 5 men lost in the Arctic, their bodies never recovered. Some blamed Travis. Others called him a scapegoat. Either way, his reappearance reopened questions that the Pentagon had buried under ice and silence. But amid the noise, one person had been watching the screen in disbelief. Emily Holly. Had just returned from her nursing shift when her phone started buzzing. Missed calls, voicemails, then a text from her sister. Turn on the news. You're not going to believe this. And there he was, walking out of a C-130 head high. Alive. Her coffee cup slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor. For 5 years, she had mourned him, held his dog tags in her hand during sleepless nights, taught herself to stop hoping. She had dated again once, but nothing serious. The wound was too deep. Now the wound stood, impossibly. At Elmendorf Air Force Base, she booked the next flight to Anchorage. Back at the base, Travis remained in the holding room when the door opened again, this time, not with officers, but a man in a decorated uniform with silver oak leaves. Colonel Nathan Briggs, the same man who had signed the KIA report 5 years earlier. He didn't sit down. "Captain Hall," he said, "you're a legend now." "I was a ghost yesterday," Travis replied. Briggs exhaled. "We're entering new territory here. There are protocols, but this is unprecedented." "No protocol for coming back from the dead?" Briggs didn't answer that. "Public's watching. They saw the rescue. They want to know what happens next." Travis met his gaze. "That depends on you." Briggs nodded slightly. "You'll be escorted to a secure location. There will be a hearing. But for now, you're still under Air Force jurisdiction." Travis stood. "I never stopped serving. You just stopped calling." That night, Travis was moved to a secure officer's quarters under surveillance, pending official review. He didn't resist. He knew the system he'd once believed in had betrayed him, but he also knew that flight had changed everything. Out the window, he watched snow fall quietly over the airstrip. He thought of his crew, of the night they vanished, of the wreckage he left behind, and the names etched into his memory. And for the first time in years, he closed his eyes knowing that soon the whole world would demand the truth. The storm wasn't over. It had only just begun. While Travis Hall sat under guarded surveillance at Elmendorf, a military transport quietly landed under cover of night. A Pentagon official, 2 uniformed JAG officers, and a civilian psychologist disembarked without announcement. The Air Force wasn't taking any chances. A man believed dead for 5 years, who reemerged flying a decommissioned aircraft to rescue a team in a classified zone, was not something anyone knew how to file under normal. But outside the walls of the base, a very different story had begun to take shape. Across the country, the phrase "Ghostbird 1" had gone viral. Journalists had pulled every scrap from the 2020 crash. Reddit threads pieced together timelines. Veterans who'd once flown with Hawley uploaded photos, flight logs, and old call sign patches. The hashtag the ghost returned topped every platform. But the question that lit up every comment section was the same. Why did he disappear? And now that he was back, what did the government want to do with him? 3 days earlier, Hawley had cut through a storm cell that would have grounded even modern airliners. The medevac crew had huddled in silence as the C-130 trembled against wind shear and whiteout conditions. Jenkins, the same medic who'd nearly lost 2 patients in the crash, sat near the cockpit, watching Hale's hands as he worked the controls with eerie calm. "You've done this before," Jenkins had finally muttered. Hawley didn't glance back. "You don't forget. Is it true what they said about you going down in a blizzard?" Hall nodded once. Jenkins asked what everyone wanted to. "How'd you make it out?" Travis didn't answer for a while. The sound of the engines filled the space. "Walked," Jenkins blinked. "Walked 63 miles to a ranger outpost. Took 6 days. 2 toes froze. I buried my co-pilot with his tags before I left." The medic stared, stunned. "Why didn't you call for help?" "I did. They just didn't answer." Now, sitting under base watch, Hawley played the memory again and again in his head. The radio static. The silence after he'd reported the civilian. Research group's SOS. His CO's voice, ordering him to stay on mission. the tightness in his chest as he chose to disobey and reroute toward the stranded civilians, and the crackle of the Arctic wind when the plane tore through frozen air, clipped a mountain ridge, and slammed into ice like an axe to stone. His crew had never stood a chance. He was the only one who'd crawled from the wreck when he'd reached. The ranger outpost half dead, beard caked in blood, boots split, he'd begged them to call in a signal. They did. But by the time help arrived, a military vehicle showed up, not to save him, but to silence him. "You're lucky to be alive," they'd said, and they handed him papers that said he wasn't. A knock came at the door. A female officer stepped in, saluted. "You have a visitor." Before he could ask who, Emily walked in. For a full second, neither of them moved. Then she stepped forward slowly, her fingers trembling. "You? You're not a dream." "No," Travis said, standing slowly. "Not this time." She looked older, stronger, maybe. But he recognized her in an instant. Same eyes, same presence. Still the only anchor he ever had. "I watched you die," she said. "I buried your photo. I let myself forget how your voice sounded." "I didn't want that," he said. "You didn't give me a choice." There was pain in her voice, real, sharp, but she hadn't come for anger. She stepped closer, placed a hand on his chest. "You flew through a storm to save strangers. You could have died again." "I already had," he said softly. This time it had to matter. She stared at him a long moment, then pulled him into a hug that felt more like an exhale. A release. Her voice broke when she whispered, "Don't disappear again." He said nothing, but his arms didn't let go. Hours later, Colonel Briggs returned to the base briefing room. Around the long table sat Pentagon lawyers, intelligence, analysts, and senior Air Force leadership. They had one task: determine Travis Hale's future. He violated protocol, a JAG officer said. "He also saved 6 lives, a general replied. "His return could destabilize the credibility of our mission records, or restore faith that honor still means something in uniform." Briggs stayed silent through most of it, but when asked directly for his recommendation, he cleared his throat and said, "You don't bury heroes. You don't punish men who come back from the dead to finish a job the rest of us weren't brave enough to take." Another officer leaned forward. "You're the one who signed off on his death report." Briggs nodded. "And I've regretted it ever since." Back in the airstrip hangar, Travis asked for one thing: access to the aircraft he flew in on. The same C-130 he'd pulled from retirement and kept, flight-worthy for years under a different identity. The crew that had worked with him, unknowingly for half a decade, stood around him as he opened the side hatch and stepped into the belly of the plane. "Everything still works," he said, almost proud. "You flew this alone?" one of the mechanics asked. Travis nodded. "She's slower than I remember, but she still knows the sky." Another voice joined the group, Colonel Briggs. "She's not just a plane anymore," Briggs said. "She's part of the story." Halle turned. "Then don't mothball her, use her." Briggs gave a faint smile. "We might have a better idea." Within 48 hours, the Pentagon made a public statement. After thorough review, the Department of the Air Force confirms the identity and actions of Captain Travis Hale. He is hereby reinstated to active reserve status with full honors. The events surrounding his disappearance and subsequent rescue flight are being declassified. Captain Hale's aircraft, call sign Ghostbird 1, will be recommissioned as a training and rescue platform for Arctic extreme response missions. That night, Hall sat inside the empty cockpit, fingers resting on the controls. Emily sat beside him, watching the snow fall through the windshield. "I thought this chapter was closed," she said. "It was, until someone roped me back in." She looked over at him. "What are you going to do now?" He glanced at the instrument panel, then at the stars outside. Fly, and this time I won't do it alone. By the time Travis Hale's reinstatement was publicly confirmed, the world had already decided he was a hero. Cable news anchors debated the implications of his return, while military historians traced the story's roots with white gloves. Former pilots called him a man who chose the mission over medals, and on social media, tens of thousands adopted the call sign Ghostbird in their usernames. Even civilians, with no military background, began wearing commemorative patches, a silhouette of a C-130 over jagged Arctic ice, stitched with the words, "Dead on paper, alive in purpose," but not everyone was cheering in the closed corridors. Of military leadership, there were still voices uneasy with what Travis Hale represented. His return had shined a spotlight on operational negligence, cover-ups, and 5 years of silence. The truth was raw, and raw truth was dangerous. General Warner, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, tapped his pen during a private debrief. "So we're celebrating a man who disobeyed orders?" "Who saved lives," replied Colonel Briggs, without missing a beat. Warner raised an eyebrow. He walked away from the wreckage. "Vanished for 5 years. Because you all buried him before the snow even stopped falling." The room went silent. Warner didn't reply. He didn't have to. The images of Hale landing the C-130 had done more to restore public faith in the Air Force than any recruitment campaign in years. Still, the general wasn't concerned with sentiment. He was concerned with precedent. "If we glorify this," he said, "what message are we sending?" Briggs leaned forward. "That honor still matters, even when it's inconvenient." Meanwhile, Travis wasn't watching interviews or reading headlines. He was out on the tarmac before sunrise, helping 2 young mechanics inspect the recommissioned 100 to 130, now officially restored to military registry under the name Ghostbird 1. The paint had been retouched, the tires replaced, the systems calibrated. But Travis still ran his hands over her fuselage as if she were an old warhorse, not a war machine. "She never quit on me," he told one of the airmen, "so I won't quit on her." That same day, he received word of his new orders. Not deployment, but instruction. Travis was being assigned as the lead trainer for a brand new Arctic Response Flight program. The role was strategic. It kept him in the cockpit, but it also put his experience to work by preparing others to survive the very missions that once nearly killed him. He would lead simulations, winter survival schools, emergency landings, icecrack, navigation, all of it. Some officers viewed it as an olive branch. Others saw it as containment. To Travis, it was purpose. Emily stood beside him when the announcement came. "You're going back to training new pilots?" she asked. He nodded. "Better they learn from someone who's already crashed." She gave a dry smile. "Promise me you'll stay out of blizzards this time." "I'll try." He paused, then added, "But if I had to do it again, I wouldn't change anything. Not even the part where I vanished." Emily looked at him with a softness that hadn't existed 5 years ago. "Because of them?" "No," he said. "Because of who I became." Across the country, a documentary crew began filming the Ghostbird files, interviewing survivors of the medevac rescue. Jenkins, now promoted to staff sergeant, told the camera, "We were sure we were going to die on that ice. Then this plane shows up through the snow. No call signs we recognized. Just this voice over the radio saying, 'I'm inbound.'" He sounded calm, like he wasn't even surprised we were out there. He paused. "And when we saw him? That was the first time I'd ever seen a ghost. Not scary, not cold. Just right. Like the guy was made for that moment." But not everyone saw Travis through rose-colored lenses. An internal probe into the 2020 crash, reopened by pressure from veterans groups and the media, revealed damning omissions. Original flight records were altered. Communications logs were missing. And most damning of all, the original mission commander, Brigadier General Caro, had knowingly denied Hale's request to divert toward the civilian distress signal. His justification? Non-military targets were not our concern at the time. That decision cost 5 of Hale's crew their lives. A congressional subcommittee summoned Caro to testify. Hale was offered the same opportunity to sit before lawmakers and lay bare everything. He refused. "I came back to fly," he told Colonel Briggs, "not to burn bridges. Let them figure out what's broken. I'm busy fixing what isn't." Briggs nodded. "You're not the same man I signed off on 5 years ago." "No," Travis replied. "I'm better." On the anniversary of his crash, Travis organized a small memorial at the edge of the airfield. A plaque bearing 5 names: Crew of Operation Frostline, 2020. The wind howled that morning, a bitter echo of the storm that took them dot as he read. Each name aloud, recruits and veterans alike stood in silence. Emily was there. Jenkins was there. Even Colonel Briggs. When the final name was spoken, Travis closed the small notebook, stepped back, and saluted the rising sun. Then he turned to the group and said, "They didn't die following orders. They died doing what was right. That's the only compass that matters up there." Someone asked, "And you? How did you make it?" Travis smiled faintly by walking away from the map. Later that evening, inside the hangar, Travis was approached by a young female pilot with snow still on her boots. "Sir," she said, "I just wanted to say, I hope I get to fly with you someday." Travis looked up from his checklist. "Then start by learning how not to crash." She laughed nervously. "And if I do?" He handed her a folded map. "Walk until you find someone worth flying for." Outside, the snow fell steadily. Ghostbird 1 stood ready, her engines silent, her frame unshaken. No longer retired, no longer forgotten. She belonged to the skies again, and so did her pilot. 2 months after his reinstatement, Travis Hale was back in the cockpit, but this time not as a ghost. He wore his name on his chest again. No secrecy, no disguises. Just purpose. It started with a briefing that felt far too familiar. "Sir," said Lieutenant Brooke Harris, sliding a folder across the table, "we've got a situation developing over Nunavut. Civilian research station, 12 personnel, stranded by ice collapse. The Canadian Air Force is pinned down by a weather wall." Travis opened the folder. He froze. The location 113. Nautical miles from where his own crash had happened 5 years ago. It wasn't déjà vu. It was a call. Has SAR tried airdrops? They did. Supplies were blown off course. What do they need? Evacuation. 3 are hypothermic. 1 has a compound fracture. Travis looked up. "What assets do we have?" Brooke didn't flinch. "Ghostbird 1 is fueled and ready." By the time they reached the runway, the storm was already crawling over the northern horizon like a living thing. The kind of cold that didn't just numb, it claimed. Travis glanced at his crew, all hand-picked from the Arctic Response Program. Every one of them had trained under him. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Marcus Eagle Renner, asked the question no one else had. "You sure you want to fly into that again?" Travis smiled faintly. Didn't spend 5 years surviving a crash just to avoid a little wind. Eagle chuckled. "That's the most Travis Hale thing I've ever heard." Once airborne, the mission unfolded with tense precision. They crossed into Canadian airspace with clearance, flying low over shifting ice sheets that groaned like distant thunder. Visibility was barely 200 feet. Wind speeds climbed past 70 knots. Still, Ghostbird 1 cut through it like she'd been made for this. But then, turbulence slammed them sideways. Stabilizers struggling. shouted Eagle. Travis gritted his teeth. Compensate manually. The crew scrambled to hold course as the wind howled through the fuselage and rattled bolts. An emergency beacon pinged on the nav screen. The station was close. Then a sudden downdraft dropped them hard. They lost altitude fast. The world turned. White dot inside the cabin. The med crew strapped down stretchers and locked into harnesses. Below, the Arctic swallowed landmarks in seconds. Ground team says visibility 0, Eagle reported. IR sensors? Flickering. Too much snow interference. They needed eyes on the ground, and they had none. Travis reached down and pulled out something old and scuffed. His personal field map, the same one he'd walked with after the crash. He stared at it. Then the memory hit him. A ridge 6 clicks west of the crash site, elevated enough to cut through the storm. We're rerouting to Sector 7, he ordered. That's not on the chart, said Eagle. I know. Trust me. Minutes later, the ridge broke through the clouds like a lifeboat of ice. From there, Travis spotted the glimmer of metal below, the weather station, partially buried. No movement. He keyed the comms. This is Ghostbird 1 to Station Alpha. Do you read? A pause, then static. Then, Ghostbird, this is Alpha read you. 3 survivors exposed, need evac hostile winds. Eagle looked at him. No way we land without skidding into the ocean. We're not landing, Travis replied. We're winching. The C-130 hovered dangerously low, buffeted by gusts that threatened to knock it sideways. The loadmaster dropped the hoist cable as medics braced in the freezing rear bay. One by one, the stranded researchers were brought up, each lift a battle of timing, grip, and gravity. Ice clung to their suits. One was unconscious. Another kept repeating the same word. Miracle, miracle. The last survivor was a young scientist with a broken femur. As he reached the bay doors, he looked up, his eyes wide. Wait, you're the guy. From the Frostline story. Travis gave a faint nod. Dead men don't fly, the scientist said. Travis grinned. Sometimes they do. Back in the air. The tension broke only once they cleared the worst of the storm. Shears erupted in the cabin. The med team stabilized the injured. Brooke radioed ahead for landing clearance, but Travis didn't smile. He stared out the cockpit window, eyes fixed. On the white below, you thinking about them again? Eagle asked. Travis nodded. Every time I fly over this place, I remember their faces, the ones I lost, the ones I couldn't save. Eagle didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, and the ones you still can. Travis turned, jaw tight. You're right. When they landed, officials and press were waiting again. But Travis didn't stop for cameras. He went straight to the hangar, sat at a folding table, and began writing down coordinates, patterns, and adjustments from memory. The storm's behavior, downdraft triggers, aerial anomalies. He labeled the folder. Ghostbird Doctrine, Volume 2. Colonel Briggs later found him there. You know, we just got 20 new applicants for Arctic response in the last 2 hours? Good. Travis replied. I want the next Ghostbird ready before I'm too old to fly. Briggs leaned on the table. You ever think about retirement? Travis smirked. I did. Then the snow called me back. In a final gesture that night, Travis walked back out to Ghostbird 1. He placed a small token on her dash. A dog tag. It wasn't his dot. It belonged to Staff Sergeant Will Kramer, one of the 5 men who hadn't made it out 5 years ago. Travis whispered, still flying with me. Then he stepped down, turned off the hangar lights, and disappeared into the cold. But this time, not as a ghost, not as a pilot. Word of the Ghostbird mission spread faster than even Travis expected. Within 48 hours, social media flooded with clips of the Arctic extraction. News anchors scrambled to confirm what many were calling a military resurrection. And in military forums, something unusual was happening. Cadets, reservists, even retired airmen were sharing his story. Travis Hall had gone from ghost to symbol, but not everyone was celebrating. Pentagon higher-ups, while quietly impressed, weren't thrilled. About the optics of a pilot who'd been presumed dead, breaking every protocol to fly unsanctioned missions. They sent a letter, subtle but clear. Consider remaining in an advisory role moving forward. Travis read it, folded it, and went back to the simulator. I'm not done flying, he muttered. Meanwhile, Arctic Response HQ was exploding. With momentum. 3 more calls came in from allied governments. Greenland, Norway, and Russia, all asking to borrow Ghostbird 1 and her pilot for emergency extraction drills. Travis approved training missions, but declined any personal involvement. He wasn't interested in being a trophy, but one morning, Brooke brought a file that made him pause. Small town in Alaska. Population 93. Cut off after landslides took out the only access road. There's a blizzard on the way. FEMA can't get there in time. Local response? Overwhelmed. And no one else can fly through that kind of mountain corridor. Travis leaned back. This is personal. He didn't mean emotional. He meant technical. That part of Alaska was where Travis had flown. His first low-visibility recon back in his early 20s. A narrow channel between 2 ridges nicknamed the Devil's Alley. Even in clear skies, it was tight, with snow and wind. Deadly, but he didn't hesitate. Prep Ghostbird. Eagle caught him on the way out of the planning room. Didn't they just ask you to stop being a cowboy? Travis grinned. It's not cowboy behavior if no one else can do it. Eagle laughed. That's just semantics. The mission began at dawn. Ghostbird-1 climbed into the morning chill, like a knife slicing the cold. Visibility dropped under 100 meters within minutes. Between jagged cliffs, the wind funneled into a screaming vortex. Every moment inside Devil's Alley required micro-adjustments. Tailwinds building, said Eagle, compensating pitch. We'll reach the town in 6. Outside, it was white chaos. Inside, it was silence, pure concentration. Travis's hands never left the yoke. His eyes scanned instruments and terrain simultaneously. He remembered the crevasse from his first recon, the one that looked solid but wasn't. He veered left 5 seconds before the ice cracked below. Jesus, Eagle whispered. How do you know? I didn't, Travis replied. I remembered. When they reached the town, conditions were worse than projected. Roofs buried. One structure collapsed. Civilians huddled in the school building, the only one with heat. Travis circled once, taking in the layout. Not enough room for a full landing. Eagle agreed. Even the main road's buried, Travis pointed. There, next to the water tower. We can drop there, winch in, shuttle them out 5 at a time. It was tight, absurdly so. They could see townspeople waving below as Ghostbird 1 descended through the snow. The crew deployed the hoist, and medics began bringing people up, children first. Then elderly. One woman, wrapped in a wool shawl, reached the top and froze when she saw Travis. I know you, she whispered. He smiled. I get that a lot. Lately, you're the ghost. My husband showed me your picture last week. Guess I'm not a ghost anymore. No, she said. Ghosts don't save people. You do. They completed 4 lifts, nearly all 93 residents, in under 2 hours. On the final run, Travis noticed a boy gripping something in his hand. A compass. One of the old brass kinds. He handed it up. My granddad said, give this to the man who flew through the white. Travis accepted it, stunned. What's your granddad's name? The boy smiled. Captain Bryce. He flew cargo back in '86. That name hit like lightning. Bryce had been the first man to teach Travis emergency descent drills. He clutched the compass tighter. Thank you, KID. You just brought me full circle. Once back. At HQ, Travis didn't speak to the press. Instead, he went straight to the hangar. Again, he laid out 3 maps, all Arctic or near Arctic territories. I want pre-storm corridors identified, he told Brooke. We've been reacting too much. Let's start anticipating. You want to build a predictive rescue grid? She asked. Exactly. I'm not just here to fly anymore. I'm here to make sure no one else gets left behind. Brooke nodded. Then we'll need more pilots, more ghost birds. Travis finally looked up. Then let's start training. That week, he initiated the first ghost bird training program. Candidates came from all branches. One woman had flown medical helis in Afghanistan. One man had ditched a burning C-17 and walked out of a jungle barefoot. All of them had one thing in common. They had tasted death and refused to let it define them. Travis walked into the hangar on day 1. No rank. No insignia. Just experience. I'm not here to make you famous, he said. I'm here to teach you to fly into storms that would make others turn around. If you're here for glory, leave now. No one moved out by the end of week 2. Word reached the president. Travis received a call he didn't expect, nor particularly want. Captain Hall, the voice said, we'd like to recognize your contribution at the National Honors Summit. Front row, full decorum. Travis paused. Respectfully, sir. I'd rather stay flying. You sure? It's a big platform. Travis looked out the window of his quarters. Snow was falling again. I already have one. Late one night, Brooke found Travis sitting alone in the hangar beside Ghostbird 1. You okay? She asked. He didn't look at her. I keep wondering why I survived. 5 years alone out there. Why me? Brooke sat beside him. You survived because someone needed to remind the world what real courage looks like. He chuckled. I just followed the compass. Brooke smiled. Then keep following it. He nodded Dot, and for the first time since returning from the dead, he felt alive. The National Honor Summit was packed with dignitaries, military brass, and journalists from every corner of the globe. The large auditorium buzzed with anticipation, but Travis Hall sat quietly backstage, his flight jacket folded neatly beside him. He didn't want the spotlight, thought he wanted the mission, but tonight wasn't about him. It was about the crews he lost, the lives saved, and the message that courage sometimes comes from the shadows. When the announcer called his name, a hush fell over the room. Cameras flashed as he took the stage, not as a ghost, but as a man. Returned from the edge, his speech was brief, but powerful. 5 years ago, I was declared dead, forgotten. But in that silence, I learned one thing. A mission doesn't end because the world stops listening. It ends when the last life is safe. I'm here to remind you all, whether lost in the ice, lost in time, or lost in doubt, that we owe it to each other to keep flying, keep fighting, keep believing. The audience rose to their feet. Backstage, Emily waited. When Travis stepped down, she pulled him into an embrace. Welcome home, she whispered. His smile was tired but genuine. Feels like I finally am. In the weeks that followed, the Ghostbird training program expanded exponentially. Travis oversaw curriculum development, ensuring every pilot understood not just how to fly, but why. He visited remote outposts, talked with survivors, and stayed in the cockpit whenever possible. Each flight was a reminder of the thin line between life and death, and the power of will to cross it. One evening, after a long day in the simulator, he received a call from the Pentagon. Captain High, we're recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. He was silent a moment. Sir, he said finally. "I didn't come back for medals." "We know," the voice replied. "But the nation needs to honor those who never stopped flying, even when the world wrote them off." Travis accepted the award quietly, dedicating it to his fallen crew. The ceremony was broadcast live. For millions, it was the first time they heard the full story. The crash, the silence, the impossible rescue. Letters poured in. Veterans thanked him for giving voice to sacrifices forgotten. Young pilots wrote, inspired to join the Arctic response. Families of lost soldiers found closure. And somewhere, buried beneath all the noise, Travis found peace. Months later, as winter gripped Alaska once again, Travis stood beside Ghostbird 1 on a frozen runway. The sky glowed faintly with northern lights. Emily joined him, her breath misting in the cold air. "You ready?" He looked up at the stars. Always. Together, they climbed aboard. As the engines roared to life, Travis took the yoke, feeling the familiar hum beneath his hands. The plane surged forward, lifting into the crisp night. The world below was silent, cold and vast, but above, Ghostbird 1 soared, a beacon of hope. In that moment, Travis Hawley wasn't a ghost. He was a pilot who refused to fade, a man who came back from death to save lives, and a legend who would keep flying no matter what storms lay ahead. The end